It was a long time ago when they first heard him scream. It scared them then, and it scares them now. They say that for years, it was a quiet matter confined to a small, out-of-the-way community, until it suddenly exploded into B-movie history and cryptid lore. Today we'll look into the fascinating story behind the legend of Boggy Creek. I'm Tyler Martin, and this is Monsters from the Id. A haven of expansive wilderness and scenic beauty, Arkansas has well earned its nickname, the Natural State. Long after many other lands had been brought to heel by human settlement, this region proved particularly resistant to the encroachment of civilization. The Sulphur River bottoms in the southwestern part of the state are a prime example of nature's steadfast resistance to human progress. Today, parts of these primeval forests and swamplands remain much as they were in ages past, deep, impenetrable, seeming to dare any outdoorsman bold or foolish enough to brave their considerable hazards. Of course, where man dares not venture, other forms of life will thrive. Fish and fowl of various stripes, frogs, beaver, alligators, wild hogs, and, depending on who you ask, perhaps something more mysterious. The story goes that as modern civilization expanded into this inhospitable terrain, quiet murmurings began to circulate among local inhabitants about something altogether different from the usual fish and game. It is claimed that from the early 20th century onward, some residents in the vicinity of Fouke started becoming acquainted with what would later bring their sleepy community into the national spotlight. Along Boggy Creek and other waterways marking the area, sightings were made of a large, hairy creature that walked and at times ran on two legs, much like a human. The animal, if it can be called an animal, was generally described as being furtive and retiring. It would often appear to be minding its own business, quickly slipping away once it had been seen. Sometimes it seemed curious, observing witnesses from a distance or even peering into windows. But on a few occasions it was seen to behave aggressively, gesticulating with its long arms and emitting a haunting scream, and only retreating after being met with gunfire. Rather than run to tell the press about these incidents, people chose to keep quiet for fear of ridicule, only sharing their stories with close relatives and friends. Some lodged reports with the local authorities, but none sought or gained the attention of the newspapers. Over time, more and more respected locals, many of them veteran hunters and trappers who were intimately acquainted with the bottomlands and the local wildlife, seemed to find themselves in the presence of something even they could not explain. As the years passed, the quiet whispers started to pick up volume as word of more encounters began to circulate. Until now, the sightings had not caused any kind of stir in the community, with the accounts being mostly dismissed and forgotten. But by the mid-1960s, the possibility of a strange and potentially dangerous creature in their midst became a point of concern for locals, who finally organized a large-scale hunt for the beast. Despite their best efforts, the search turned up nothing concrete, though sightings persisted. Even with this significant development, the news media remained unaware of the peculiar goings-on in and around Miller County. That changed in May of 1971, when two young families who had just moved to Fouke reported being terrorized by a hairy beast which appeared repeatedly around their shared home. One witness, Bobby Ford, was hospitalized for light injuries and shock, and claimed to have been attacked by the animal. This harrowing story was related by local newspapers and subsequently picked up nationwide. The interest of the press and the larger public had now been piqued, and the so-called Ford incident was soon followed by more documented sightings. Hardly a month later, a set of strange three-toed tracks was discovered in a nearby soybean field, and journalists were now on hand to report on this interesting find. While county authorities seriously investigated the matter, the hubbub continued to mount. Bounties offered up for the capture of the supposed animal drew in hundreds of would-be monster hunters from across the region, creating headaches for the townspeople and presenting safety concerns. What had once been the subject of quiet rumors was quickly reaching fever pitch. As word spread of the purported monster in Fouke, an advertising man in neighboring Texarkana was among the many taking notice. Charles B. Pierce was seeking to break into filmmaking and saw a unique opportunity in these strange tales. Seizing on the topic as the premise for a movie, he managed to obtain funding from a business associate, L.W. Ledwell, and made for Fouke to speak with residents about their encounters with the creature. Though he managed to collect some intriguing stories, the would-be director ran into problems when it became clear that many of the people he was interviewing wanted no part of a movie. These quiet rural folk greatly valued personal privacy and preferred to be left alone. Not to be deterred, Pierce called on fellow adman Earl E. Smith to write a screenplay based on the sightings. It was decided to make a pseudo-documentary inspired directly by eyewitness accounts. With the script still in the works, Pierce and Smith enlisted the aid of Julius Crabtree, better known as Smokey, a veteran hunter, trapper, and welder who agreed to serve as a guide, enabling Pierce to obtain a great deal of valuable footage in and around the expansive Mercer Bayou. While Smokey never claimed to have seen the monster himself, some years before, his son Lynn had his own hair-raising run-in, triggering the first major hunt for the creature. Smokey also leveraged his good reputation among the townsfolk to help convince some reluctant parties to participate in the picture and allow filming on their property. The minuscule budget made hiring professional crew a tough proposition. Pierce thus resorted largely to local volunteers, and, it is claimed, some rather shady practices. More on that later. When possible, actual eyewitnesses played themselves in the film, with the rest of the cast consisting mostly of other Miller County residents. The creature itself, mostly glimpsed in darkness or seen vaguely from a distance, was created by modifying a simple gorilla suit with wig clippings. Pierce brought to bear all the expertise gained during his years of television to put together the best movie he could muster. When shooting was at last completed, he headed to Hollywood to secure post-production services. Short on cash, he managed to strike a deal with a small company headed by composer Jaime Mendoza Nava, who would supply the film's soundtrack and employ an editor in exchange for a portion of the royalties. With the finished picture now in hand, the director went in search of a studio willing to distribute the fruits of his labor, but he was turned down at every corner. In considerable debt to Ledwell and Mendoza Nava, he could not afford to give up now. Taking matters into his own hands, Pierce rented an abandoned theater in Texarkana, and worked with his crew to clean it up and get things ready for the world premiere of his debut motion picture. Released in August of 1972, The Legend of Boggy Creek was an instant smash. Local success led to larger distribution deals and global exposure. The film would ultimately earn $25 million, a fine return indeed on a budget of $160,000. Given the circumstances of its creation, The Legend of Boggy Creek is quite the feat. Through a narrator, the film relates many alleged run-ins with the creature, in some cases shot on the actual locations. While some elements are added or exaggerated for dramatic effect, the essential details of the eyewitness reports remain mostly intact. Pierce manages to craft a genuinely spooky atmosphere despite the obvious budgetary constraints and limited acting skills on display. Straight-faced storytelling and an effective musical score help to raise the film above its frequently apparent limitations. In addition to the monster elements, the film serves as a compelling document of life in the bottoms. Abundant images of the swampland and local residents going about their daily lives are presented without unnecessary frills, and lend an air of authenticity not commonly found in horror films of this or any era. The terror and suspense are allayed somewhat when the narrator tries to put himself in the creature's shoes, imagining him to be quite lonely, possibly the only one of his kind. Pierce himself croons a musical interlude which portrays the beast in this sympathetic light. This is followed straight away by another number celebrating the solitude of swamp life, which accompanies young Travis Crabtree as he makes his daily rounds. This is a highlight sequence, even if the presence of two back-to-back songs is a bit much. All told, it's an immersive viewing experience, enough to make the audience wonder if there really might be a mysterious creature lurking in the swamplands of southern Arkansas, just waiting to creep up on them when they least suspect it. While some viewers may scoff at the cheap-looking monster, sentimental ballads, and less-than-stellar thespianism, these elements do add a certain flavor. Although it may seem quaint when viewed now, audiences at the time were scared out of their seats by this skulking man-beast that might just be real. Overall, The Legend of Boggy Creek is impressive, if rough around the edges, and its incredible success would not have been possible without the people of Fouke, Arkansas. But all was not well in the bottoms. According to Smokey Crabtree, Pierce had lured members of the local populace into taking part in the film with promises of financial compensation which never came. Even after the movie they helped make became a multi-million-dollar hit, the people of Fouke never saw a dime. What is more, the movie's popularity resulted in countless irresponsible hoodlums from far and wide descending on the tiny community with guns and alcohol in hand, eager to hunt down the legendary monster. Residents were subjected to relentless harassment, trespassing, and property damage, and the ruckus brought on by the earlier newspaper reports and bounty offers was soon eclipsed by this new wave of madness. Smokey, having helped Pierce get his foot in the door and provided invaluable services in the making of the film, was racked with guilt and sought a lawsuit against the director in the hopes of finding some sort of justice for his fellow townspeople. The suit was ultimately dismissed, possibly at the plaintiff's own request. Some of Smokey's claims are as difficult to verify as the existence of the mystery beast itself. He may well have been completely in earnest, or perhaps he simply saw a financial opportunity and jumped. He would not have been the only one to do so. For the backwoods town of Fouke had now become world famous, and there were those who knew an easy buck when they saw one. Monster burgers, monster shakes, and monster mementos of various kinds were made available to capitalize on the craze, and there hasn't been a time since that curiosity seekers couldn't get their hands on a souvenir to remind them of Miller County's most renowned rumored resident. While widespread attention would eventually shift away from Fouke itself, creature sightings locally and elsewhere continued, and public interest in the topic showed little sign of abating. The Legend of Boggy Creek was just one of a multitude of similarly themed movies to crop up during this period, and for better or worse, its unprecedented popularity helped kick things into high gear. Not ones to sit on such phenomenal success, the film's distributor, Fouke International, got back in on the game with 1976's Creature from Black Lake, directed by Joy Fouke Jr. In the film, two anthropology students head to the swamps of Louisiana to investigate reports of a Bigfoot-like creature, and inevitably get more than they bargained for. The picture is graced by the return of Boggy Creek composer Jaime Mendoza Nava, and strong cinematography by Dean Cundy, who would soon go on to collaborate with the legendary John Carpenter. Supporting performances by veteran actors Jack Elam and Dub Taylor add additional character to the proceedings. These aspects help somewhat to balance out certain deficiencies in the story. For instance, the creature doesn't seem to have much of a motivation. It's a murderous monster, and that's about it. As well, the ending is quite unsatisfactory. In spite of its faults, Creature from Black Lake is very watchable and easily one of the best cryptid flicks of its day, for whatever that might be worth. Despite calls to return for a sequel to his original hit, Charles Pierce was determined to expand his filmmaking horizons and steadfastly refused. Nevertheless, hoping that the Boggy Creek name and concept could continue to draw audiences, Dimension Pictures offered up director Tom Moore's return to Boggy Creek just in time for Christmas in 1977. TV stars Dawn Wells and Dana Plato headlined this uninspired oddity which bears virtually no connection to the original film. The story centers on three adventurous children who head deep into Boggy Creek on the trail of a tourist who wants to snap photographic evidence of the infamous monster, here named Big Bay Ty. They become trapped in a fierce hurricane, but when all seems lost, the beast comes to their rescue, braving the storm and towing their boat back to safety. It turns out that despite his fearsome reputation, Bay Ty is really a kind-hearted fellow who is more than willing to help those in need. The kids conclude that it's in the best interests of all involved to respect the dangers of the swamp and keep their rescuer's identity a secret, lest his safety and that of any reckless interlopers be threatened. It is difficult to contemplate why the filmmakers would make such a radical departure from the elements that had made the original Boggy Creek such a success. Perhaps they sensed that the previous film had caught lightning in a bottle with its distinctive approach and chose to change tack. Whatever the case, gone are the stark docudrama style and gripping horror that had so enthralled audiences and inspired dilettante monster hunters a few years prior. There is no longer any sense that this creature could be real and lurking in one's own backyard. Even taken on its own terms, independent of the original, Return to Boggy Creek fails to impress. This is a flat, ill-conceived kids' adventure with little to offer. Years went by and Bigfoot fever eventually began to subside. Though people still saw things they couldn't quite explain, the attention of the media and the general public moved elsewhere. Nevertheless, certain parties still felt that the Boggy Creek legend might still be worth tapping into for a few extra dollars. So in 1983, after years of pressure, Charles B. Pierce finally relented and returned to the subject with Boggy Creek 2, and the legend continues. Not content merely to serve as writer and director, Pierce casts himself in the lead role as anthropology professor Brian Lockhart, who travels to the Boggy Creek region with 3 students to investigate a remarkable sighting of the notorious monster, and, the witness claims, its offspring. Their search eventually leads them to the cabin of a hermit named Crenshaw, who has captured the little creature and plans to use it as a money ticket. Naturally, the big one, none too happy, comes crashing in, and Lockhart returns the youngster to its parent, whereupon the 2 vanish peacefully back into the bottomlands. With Pierce back at the helm and a clear return to horror territory, one would hope that some of the strength of the 1972 classic might shine through, but that's sadly not the case. The director later admitted that he simply did not want to make this movie, and considered it the worst of his career. As before, encounters with the creature are related via flashback, though this time the sightings are mostly the product of Pierce's imagination rather than eyewitness accounts. These lack the stark, authentic feel of the original and contribute little to the actual story. Parts of the film play like a retread of the aforementioned creature from Black Lake, which pulled off this type of material with considerably more punch. Things might have been improved had, for example, the plot been geared more definitively toward the disappearance of the little creature, with Crenshaw receiving more build-up as a character of interest before his entrance late in the drama. As it is, we are left with long stretches of film that don't really amount to much. All in all, Boggy Creek 2 is a dreary affair that fails decisively to live up to its predecessor. Perhaps its greatest legacy is the comedic treatment it received in a classic episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, which happened to be my introduction to the Boggy Creek movies in the late 1990s.
Suddenly, I was attacked by a Muppet. Dictator for life, Charles B. Pierce.
No matter how one chooses to weigh their relative merits, none of these later productions managed to capture the imaginations of moviegoers quite like Pierce's original. But whatever the cinematic value of the films, we must remember that this all started not with a movie, but with a local legend. Or did it? Stories of wild men, hair-covered bipedal creatures that possess attributes of both humans and apes, occur in many cultures all over the world, spanning every continent except Antarctica. The famous Yeti of the Himalayas, Sumatra's Orang Pendek, and of course the many variants of Sasquatch covering North America are just a few examples. Their reported behavior generally corresponds with what one might expect from an intelligent, reclusive primate, or, for that matter, a primitive human. Shy, at times curious, but also assertive and even dangerous when made to feel threatened. Indigenous tribes often ascribe special spiritual qualities to these entities, but nonetheless view them as very real creatures, classifying them alongside bear, deer, rabbits, and so on. From ancient times right up to the present day, not a few people have claimed to have seen and even interacted with these mysterious beings. Of course, in the modern age, most tend to dismiss such stories as mere hearsay, the results of overactive imaginations or outright lies. Hard evidence has, after all, proven very difficult to come by. Traces of the supposed creatures, hair and scat samples, recorded vocalizations, photographic images, and of course the famous footprints, are at times tantalizing but nonetheless tenuous, and often attributable to scientifically documented animals or other known phenomena. What is more, confirmed hoaxes abound, further muddying the waters. Still, enough remains unexplained for some to remain open to the possibility of something altogether unknown. It is in this context that we shall now evaluate the subject at hand. As mentioned, numerous indigenous groups in North America and elsewhere have long maintained oral histories concerning creatures that match the general description of the Fouke monster, but there seems to be no indication of the Caddo or other tribes native to this region having any such tradition. Stories of the supposed creature are said to have begun in the early 1900s, when the town of Fouke, founded in 1889 as a small religious colony, was expanding due to the establishment of a reputable school and an industrial boom, a railroad and large sawmill having facilitated the growth of the town. With an increase in human activity and swaths of the forest and swamplands being cleared away and settled, run-ins with the local wildlife, ordinary or otherwise, were bound to increase in frequency. Local authorities are claimed to have become aware of the creature incidents around the mid-1940s, with second- and third-hand accounts going back even further. But nothing managed to make it into print until 1971, with the Texarkana Gazette's coverage of the infamous Ford incident. It has been pointed out that the very fact of these stories coming to light only after that case was reported seems rather suspicious. Citing the distinct lack of a paper trail prior to the event, observers have postulated that there may have been no talk of a monster at all before those events occurred. It is suggested that when the story broke, others were encouraged to either recall or even fabricate long-forgotten incidents for the sake of attention, a trend that Charles B. Pierce, itching to make a sensational movie, was all too happy to exploit. Smokey Crabtree, who now claimed that his family had had a long history with the creature and had a personal stake in the film, would have had a lot to gain, which may go some way toward explaining his lawsuit. But as persuasive as this argument is, it does involve a certain amount of assumption, particularly about the people of Fouke, and is not necessarily definitive. Still, given a further look at the facts, it becomes clear that some parts of this legend do not stand up to scrutiny. Take, for example, the Ford incident itself. Although initial reports suggested something more anomalous, the constable's investigation revealed that a portion of the tin underpinning of the house had been torn away, as well as tracks indicating the presence of a panther, details that were even related in the movie. Indeed, it would seem that a large cat had taken up residence under the house sometime prior to the victims moving in, and did not take kindly to the sudden disturbance. The surprise and fear of suddenly dealing with an unexpected threat could well have altered the perception of the witnesses and caused them to draw mistaken conclusions about the nature and appearance of an animal which was, it must be noted, only glimpsed in darkness. And what of the peculiar footprints found in the soybean field? Exceedingly narrow and sporting 3 toes, they certainly make for a strange sight, and would seem unable to support a creature fitting the description of the Fouke monster. These prints differ significantly from those usually associated with Bigfoot and the Yeti, which tend to indicate a much wider, sturdier foot with 5 toes, as is always the case with known primates, and, according to some, often appear to exhibit characteristics that might be expected of a living animal. Nothing of the kind is apparent here. An archaeologist present at the scene declared the footprints to be an almost certain hoax, and even some researchers who have devoted considerable time and effort to the analysis of purported Sasquatch footprints do not place much stock in these tracks. What is more, reporter Jim Powell, who first covered the Ford incident for the Texarkana Gazette, noted that whatever made these initial prints took care to avoid stepping on the soybean plants. Odd behavior indeed for an animal which should have little concern for the safety of a farmer's crops. Looking at all this, it becomes difficult not to call the case closed. Whatever claims may be made about the supposed creature, the contrary evidence is measurable and substantial. However, the persistence and consistency of eyewitness accounts is enough to give one pause. Could it be that these people are all mistaken, or perhaps looking for a bit of fun? In many cases, certainly. But to put things in perspective, this is a phenomenon that stretches far beyond the borders of Arkansas and much farther back in time than the 1970s, in eras and in societies where any thought of movies or newspapers would be irrelevant. The human mind is famously capable of making mistakes and conjuring up illusions, but it is nonetheless intriguing that so many people across time, place, and culture claim to have seen essentially the same thing. Let us then suppose for the moment that at least some of these people were and are seeing something unusual. Most of the Fouke monster sightings fit the general mold of reported encounters with hairy hominids the world over, a glimpse of something out of the ordinary, a living creature made conspicuous by its large size, human-like form, and mode of locomotion, moving upright on 2 legs through forests, along bodies of water, or crossing roads. It usually keeps to itself, behaving much like a shy, secretive, occasionally curious animal, in some ways analogous to those commonly known, but remarkably different in just how much like us it seems to be. And if there were to be creatures who so excel at remaining hidden from prying eyes, they could scarcely find a better home than the Sulphur River bottoms, where many thousands of acres of dense forest and unforgiving swampland could still hold a fair share of mysteries. Words like Sasquatch and Yeti may elicit smirks or even howls of derision from certain quarters, but even such universally respected authorities as Jane Goodall and David Attenborough, who have accumulated decades of specialized expertise and first-hand experience with the natural world, have expressed openness to the possibility of such animals existing just outside the periphery of our accumulated knowledge. It is one thing to examine facts and figures from the comfort of a desk or the sterile conditions of a laboratory. In order to fully appreciate this matter, we should also realize the value to be found in human experience, as well as the infinite capacity of nature to surprise. For the residents of Fouke, Arkansas, the monster is here to stay. Real or not, it has greatly enriched the local folklore and brought worldwide fame to an obscure backwater town. Should you ever find yourself in this neck of the woods, you will come across people who have spent years hunting, fishing, camping, and making their lives around Boggy Creek and its environs. It may be that in all that time, they have never come across anything they could not explain. They may have no tale at all to tell of the famous Fouke monster. But if they don't, chances are good that they know of others who do, and who may even tell you with confidence that stories like theirs go back well before the newspapers and the movies ever breathed a word about it. You may take their claims at face value, skeptically wave them away, or choose to make no judgment at all. You may think that if such a thing existed, it stands to reason that it would have been found by now. And you may be right. But you might also bear in mind that the same nature that endowed us with reason doesn't always betray her secrets so easily, and she may yet have a few to keep along the banks of Boggy Creek. Before signing off, I would like to extend very special thanks to Fouke historian Frank McFerrin, who graciously provided a trove of information and insight and helped to make this video what it is. If you're watching, Frank, I hope I've done justice to your community and its folklore. And if any of you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more Monsters from the Id. As always, thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.